We're just days away from reaching 1,000 subscribers. If we hit this goal in the next 15 days, we'll be able to keep the channel running and continue bringing you these stories. Your subscription makes all the difference. It's quick and helps us enormously. The Huntress. Chapter 1. The Mockery. The dusty streets of Cedar Gulch, Colorado Territory, baked under the merciless August sun of 1881, as bounty hunter Catherine Kate Sullivan dismounted from her paint mare outside the town's only saloon. At 26, Kate had earned a reputation that stretched from the Rio Grande to the Canadian border, but looking at her, most folks wouldn't guess she was one of the most feared bounty hunters in the West. Standing barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with auburn hair usually braided down her back and green eyes that missed nothing, Kate looked more like a schoolmarm than a woman who'd brought in over 30 wanted men, dead or alive. But the twin Colt, .45s on her hips, and the Winchester rifle strapped to her saddle told a different story, one written in gunpowder and grit across a dozen frontier towns. Kate pushed through the batwing doors of the dusty trail saloon, her spurs jingling softly on the warped wooden floor. The usual collection of cowboys, gamblers, and drifters looked up at her entrance, and she could practically feel their dismissive glances. After 8 years in the bounty hunting business, she was used to being underestimated, and she'd learned to use that advantage whenever possible. The man she was looking for sat at a corner table, his back to the wall and his eyes constantly scanning the room. Professional habits that had kept him alive through 15 years of outlawry. Black Jack Morrison was wanted for bank robbery, cattle rustling, and murder in 3 territories, with a bounty of $800 on his head, dead or alive. At 42, he was a lean, dangerous man with cold blue eyes and silver-streaked hair, leader of a gang that had terrorized the Colorado Territory for the better part of a year. Kate approached the bar and ordered a whiskey. Knowing that Morrison would notice her eventually, she didn't have to wait long. "Well, well, well," Morrison's voice carried clearly across the suddenly quiet saloon. "Boys, look what the cat dragged in. We got ourselves a lady bounty hunter." Uda. His 3 companions, lesser outlaws with prices on their heads but not worth Kate's time, laughed on cue as Morrison rose from his chair with theatrical flair. He was dressed like a gentleman gone to seed, in a black coat that had seen better days and a string tie that had once been white. His gun belt rode low on his hips, and Kate could see the carved ivory handles of matched Colts peeking from their holsters. "Ma'am," Morrison said with exaggerated courtesy, touching the brim of his hat, "might I suggest you find yourself a different line of work? This territory ain't no place for ladies to be playing at being lawmen." A ripple of nervous laughter ran through the saloon. Kate sipped her whiskey and turned slowly to face Morrison, her expression calm and untroubled. "That's mighty kind advice, Mr. Morrison," she said pleasantly, "but I reckon I'll stick with what I know." Morrison's eyes widened slightly at her use of his name, then narrowed with dangerous interest. "Do we know each other, miss?" "Sullivan, Kate Sullivan, and we're about to know each other real well." The saloon had gone dead quiet now, every man present recognizing the electricity in the air that preceded violence. Morrison's hand moved almost imperceptibly closer to his gun, while his companions shifted in their chairs, ready to back their leader's play. "Kate Sullivan," Morrison repeated slowly, as recognition dawned in his features. "I heard of you. They say you brought in Dynamite Dan Kowalski last spring. Course they also say you needed the help of 6 Texas Rangers to do it." Kate smiled, the expression not reaching her eyes. "They say a lot of things. Most of them aren't true." "Well, Miss Sullivan," Morrison said, his voice taking on the mocking tone of a man confident in his superiority, "I hate to disappoint a lady, but I ain't planning on being anybody's prisoner today. See, I got 3 good men with me, and you." He looked her up and down dismissively. "You got whatever's hiding under that pretty little dress." His men laughed again, louder this time, encouraged by their leader's apparent dominance of the situation. Other patrons began easing toward the doors, not wanting to be caught in the crossfire when the shooting started. "Mr. Morrison," Kate said conversationally, "that bounty on your head says dead or alive. Makes no difference to me which way you come in." Morrison's laugh was genuinely amused now. "Little lady, I've been dodging bounty hunters since before you were old enough to hold a gun. You think you're going to succeed where dozens of better men have failed?" "I think," Kate replied, finishing her whiskey and setting the glass on the bar with deliberate precision, "that you're about to find out why they call me the best tracker in the territory." "Tracker?" Morrison scoffed. "Honey, tracking don't mean nothing if you can't finish what you start, and a slip of a girl like you—" He shook his head with theatrical pity. "You might follow me to hell and back, but when it comes time for a reckoning, you'll fold faster than a bad poker hand." Kate straightened to her full height, which still left her several inches shorter than any man in the room. "Mr. Morrison, I'm going to make you a proposition. You and your boys ride out of here right now, and I'll give you a 6-hour head start before I come after you." 6 hours? Morrison was grinning openly now. "What makes you think I need even 6 minutes?" "Because," Kate said quietly, "when I bring you in, and I will bring you in, I want everyone to know it was a fair chase. I want every outlaw from here to the Mexican border to understand that Catherine Sullivan doesn't need tricks or luck or help from anybody. I want them to know that when I set my sights on a man, that man is already caught. He just doesn't know it yet." Morrison's expression had grown serious during her speech, and when she finished, he studied her with the calculating gaze of a professional predator evaluating potential prey. "You know what, Miss Sullivan? I like your style. Tell you what, I'll take your 6 hours just to make this interesting, but when I put you in the ground, don't say I didn't give you a chance to walk away." He gestured to his men, who rose from their table with obvious reluctance. They'd been enjoying the show, but apparently their leader had decided it was time to make tracks. 6 hours, Morrison repeated, dropping a silver dollar on the table for his drinks. "But when those 6 hours are up, you better be ready for what's coming. Because, Catherine Sullivan, I'm going to teach you why smart ladies don't play at being men." As Morrison and his gang filed out of the saloon, Kate remained at the bar, apparently unperturbed by the confrontation. The other patrons gradually returned to their drinks and conversations, though she could feel their eyes on her and hear the whispered speculation about whether she was brave, foolish, or simply suicidal. Kate ordered another whiskey and settled in to wait. She'd meant what she said about giving Morrison a fair head start, but what the outlaw didn't know was that she'd been tracking his gang for 3 weeks already. She knew their habits, their hideouts, their escape routes, and most importantly, she knew Morrison's one fatal weakness. The man's pride would never let him run far enough or fast enough to escape her. In 6 hours, the real hunt would begin. And before the sun set again, Black Jack Morrison would learn why Catherine Sullivan had never failed to bring in her quarry. Chapter 2. The Hunt Begins. Kate Sullivan checked her pocket watch as the church bell in Cedar Gulch chimed 6 o'clock. Exactly 6 hours had passed since Morrison and his gang rode out of town, confident in their ability to outdistance a slip of a girl on their trail. The outlaw had made a critical error in assuming that Kate's offer of a head start was born from weakness rather than confidence. She'd spent the intervening hours methodically preparing for the hunt. Her paint mare, Dancer, had been fed, watered, and rested. Her weapons were cleaned and checked, her ammunition counted, and her supplies organized with the precision of someone who understood that survival often depended on the smallest details. More importantly, Kate had used the time to gather intelligence from the locals. Cedar Gulch was a small town where strangers stood out, and Morrison's gang had been noticed coming and going for the past month. A few coins in the right hands had revealed their likely destination, an abandoned mine in the foothills about 15 miles north, a hideout they'd used before and apparently felt confident enough to return to. As Kate mounted Dancer and rode north out of Cedar Gulch, she reflected on the psychology of the men she was pursuing. Morrison was experienced and cunning, but he was also arrogant. His mockery in the saloon hadn't just been for show. It revealed a genuine belief in his superiority over anyone foolish enough to challenge him. That arrogance would make him predictable, and predictable men were easier to catch. The trail Morrison's gang had left was almost insultingly obvious. 4 horses riding hard north, making no effort to conceal their passage. To most trackers, this would suggest confidence born from a substantial head start, but Kate recognized it for what it really was: contempt. Morrison believed so thoroughly in his ability to outfight a woman that he hadn't bothered with the basic precautions that had kept him alive for 15 years. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Kate followed the trail into the foothills of the Colorado Rockies. The landscape here was rugged and wild, with dense stands of pine and aspen broken by rocky outcroppings and hidden valleys. Perfect country for outlaws who knew its secrets, but also perfect hunting ground for someone who understood how to read the land. Kate had learned tracking from her father, a former army scout who'd spent 20 years chasing hostiles across the frontier. The land tells you everything you need to know, he'd taught her, if you know how to listen. Animals, men, weather, they all leave their mark. Your job is to read the story they write and figure out how it ends. Though the story Morrison's trail was telling grew more interesting as Kate climbed higher into the foothills. About 5 miles from Cedar Gulch, the gang had stopped to rest their horses and share a bottle. She could see where they'd dismounted, the circular scuff marks where men had walked around while drinking, and the glint of a discarded bottle reflecting the late afternoon sun. But it was what happened after the rest stop that told Kate she was dealing with amateurs drunk on their own legend. Instead of taking the direct route to the abandoned mine, Morrison had led his men on a circuitous path through a series of valleys and ridges that would have been effective at throwing off pursuit. If they hadn't left a trail, a blind man could follow. Horse droppings, broken branches, hoof prints in soft soil, even a bandana caught on a thorn bush. Morrison's gang was advertising their passage like a traveling circus. Kate began to wonder if the outlaw leader was setting a trap, but the more she observed, the more convinced she became that this was simply the behavior of men who'd never been seriously pursued by someone who knew what they were doing. As dusk began to settle over the mountains, Kate found herself approaching the area where the abandoned mine was located. According to her sources in Cedar Gulch, it was situated in a box canyon with only one way in or out, the kind of defensible position that outlaws loved and bounty hunters usually avoided. But Kate had been studying the topographical features as she rode, and she'd spotted something that Morrison had probably overlooked. The canyon containing the mine was accessible by the main trail, but there was also a steep ridge overlooking the entire area from the east. It would be a difficult climb in the dark, but it would give Kate a commanding view of the outlaws' camp and multiple options for how to proceed. She dismounted about a mile from the canyon mouth and led Dancer into a concealed hollow where the mare would be safe and hidden. From her saddlebags, Kate retrieved a spyglass, extra ammunition, a coil of rope, and a bundle of supplies she hoped she wouldn't need, but had learned to always carry: medical supplies, emergency food, and a small pouch of gold for bribes or emergencies. The climb up the eastern ridge was every bit as difficult as Kate had anticipated, made more treacherous by the need to move silently in near-total darkness. But 2 hours after leaving Dancer, she found herself lying flat on a rocky outcropping with a perfect view of Morrison's camp below. The outlaws had indeed chosen the abandoned mine as their hideout, and they'd made themselves comfortable with the confidence of men who believed they were untouchable. A cheerful campfire burned in front of the mine entrance, around which Morrison and his 3 companions sat drinking and playing cards. Their horses were picketed nearby, unsaddled and clearly settled in for the night. Kate studied the scene through her spyglass, noting details that would be crucial for what came next. Morrison sat with his back to a large boulder, his guns within easy reach, but not immediately at hand. His men were arranged around the fire in a loose circle, their attention focused on their cards and whiskey rather than the surrounding darkness. Most telling of all, there was no sentry posted. These men were so convinced of their superiority and security that they hadn't bothered with the basic precautions that separated living outlaws from dead ones. Kate settled down to wait and plan. She could attempt to take them in their sleep, but that would mean killing men who might be worth more alive than dead. She could try to stampede their horses, leaving them afoot and vulnerable, but that would alert them to her presence without guaranteeing success. Or she could do what no one would expect from a lone bounty hunter facing 4 armed desperados. She could walk right into their camp and give them a chance to surrender. It was a crazy plan, the kind that got bounty hunters killed and left their bodies feeding the coyotes. But as Kate watched Morrison laugh at something one of his men had said, she remembered his mocking words in the saloon and felt her jaw tighten with determination. Morrison had called her a slip of a girl who would fold faster than a bad poker hand. In a few hours, he was going to learn that Catherine Sullivan didn't fold. She raised the stakes until her opponents broke. The real hunt was about to begin, and before dawn broke over the Colorado territory, Blackjack Morrison would discover why smart outlaws didn't mock the Huntress. Chapter 3. The Confrontation. Kate waited until the deepest part of the night, when the outlaws' fire had burned low and their vigilance had been further dulled by whiskey and exhaustion. Through her spyglass, she could see that Morrison's men were barely conscious, leaning against rocks and saddles in the relaxed poses of men who felt completely secure in their hideout. Morrison himself was still awake, but barely. He sat with his hat pulled low over his eyes, occasionally stirring to add wood to the dying fire or take another pull from the bottle passing among the gang. Perfect conditions for what Kate had planned. She made her way down from the ridge with the silent stealth her father had taught her, moving like a ghost among the rocks and scrub pine that dotted the canyon walls. Every step was calculated to avoid loose stones or dry branches that might alert the outlaws to her presence. It took her nearly an hour to reach the canyon floor, but when she did, she was positioned less than 50 yards from their camp, hidden behind a massive boulder that had fallen from the canyon wall decades earlier. From this vantage point, Kate could see the outlaws clearly in the flickering firelight. Morrison's 3 companions were now fully asleep, their snores echoing off the canyon walls. The outlaw leader himself was fighting drowsiness, his head nodding as he struggled to stay alert. Kate drew both her Colts and checked the cylinders one final time. 6 shots in each weapon, 12 bullets total against 4 men. Not ideal odds for a conventional gunfight, but Kate wasn't planning anything conventional. Taking a deep breath to steady her nerves, Kate stepped out from behind the boulder and walked calmly into the circle of firelight, her weapons drawn but pointed at the ground. "Good evening, Mr. Morrison," she said conversationally. Morrison's head snapped up, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun before freezing as he registered the twin barrels pointed in his direction. His movement and Kate's voice woke his companions, who sat up groggily before becoming fully alert as they realized their camp had been invaded. "Well, I'll be damned," Morrison said slowly, his initial surprise giving way to something that might have been admiration. "Kate Sullivan, you actually found us. "I told you I would," Kate replied, keeping her weapons trained on Morrison while her eyes tracked the movements of his men. "Now I'm here to collect." "3 against 1, little lady," said Pete Kowalski, one of Morrison's lieutenants, as he started to reach for his gun. "Even you ain't that good." "4 against 1, Morrison corrected, never taking his eyes off Kate. "And you're right, Pete. Nobody's that good." "Maybe not," Kate agreed pleasantly. "But here's the thing. You boys are sitting around a campfire, silhouetted against the flames, while I'm standing in shadow with 2 guns already drawn. Mathematics says I can put down at least 2 of you before any of you clear leather. Question is, which 2 of you want to die for Black Jack Morrison's reputation?" The outlaws exchanged glances, suddenly less certain of their advantage. Kate had positioned herself perfectly, with the fire backlighting them while leaving her partially obscured in darkness. More importantly, her calm demeanor and steady gun hands suggested she was exactly as dangerous as her reputation claimed. "You got a lot of brass, Miss Sullivan," Morrison said, "but you're still outnumbered. Even if you get 2 of us, the other 2 will get you." "Will they?" Kate asked. "Pete there looks pretty shaky to me, and young Tommy hasn't even reached for his gun yet. I'm thinking he's smart enough to know when he's outmatched." Tommy Martinez, the youngest member of the gang at barely 19, looked nervously between Kate and Morrison. "Boss, maybe we should listen to what she has to say." "Shut up, Tommy," snarled Jake Wilson, the 4th member of the gang. "We ain't surrendering to no woman." "Your choice," Kate said agreeably, "but before you make your final decision, you might want to know that I didn't come here alone." Morrison's eyes sharpened. "You're lying." "Am I?" Kate smiled. "Take a look around, Mr. Morrison. Count the shadows. Listen to the night sounds. Do they seem right to you?" It was pure bluff, but Kate delivered it with such confidence that all 4 outlaws found themselves glancing nervously at the darkness surrounding their camp. The canyon was full of shadows and strange acoustics that could easily conceal a dozen men, and their imaginations began populating every dark corner with hidden gunmen. "Even if you're telling the truth," Morrison said, though Kate could hear the doubt creeping into his voice, "I ain't going to jail. I'd rather die here than hang in Denver." "Who said anything about hanging?" Kate asked. "Morrison, you're worth $800 to me alive, but only 400 dead. From a business standpoint, I'd prefer to take you breathing." "And from a personal standpoint?" Morrison asked. Kate's smile turned cold. "From a personal standpoint, I want every outlaw between here and Mexico to know that Catherine Sullivan keeps her word. I told you I'd bring you in, and here I am." The standoff stretched for several heartbeats, tension thick as smoke in the canyon air. Kate could see Morrison calculating odds, weighing his options, trying to find an angle that would give him an advantage. But every scenario led back to the same conclusion. He was caught, and his only choices were surrender or death. "Boss," Tommy said quietly, "maybe we should—" His words were cut off as Morrison suddenly dove sideways, reaching for his gun as he rolled behind a supply pack. "Take her!" he shouted. Kate's response was instantaneous and devastating. Her left-hand Colt barked twice, putting Pete Kowalski down before he could clear his holster. Her right-hand gun spoke once, sending Jake Wilson spinning into the darkness with a bullet in his shoulder. Tommy Martinez, faced with a split-second choice between death and survival, threw his hands high in the air and stayed exactly where he was. Morrison rose from behind the supply pack with his gun drawn, only to find Kate's weapons trained directly on his chest. In the space of 3 seconds, the outlaw leader had gone from commanding a gang of 4 to facing a lone bounty hunter with 1 wounded subordinate and 1 terrified kid as his only remaining backup. "Like I said," Kate observed calmly, "mathematics. Drop the gun, Morrison." For a moment that stretched like an eternity, Morrison stood frozen with his weapon half raised, pride warring with self-preservation in his cold blue eyes. Then, with visible reluctance, he let the gun fall from his fingers. "Damn you, Kate Sullivan," he said quietly. "Damn you to hell." "Maybe," Kate replied, holstering one weapon while keeping the other trained on him. "But not today. Tommy, you want to live to see your 20th birthday. You start binding up Jake's wound. Morrison, you sit down right there and put your hands behind your back." As the outlaw leader reluctantly complied, Kate reflected on the evening's events. Morrison had mocked her in the saloon, calling her a slip of a girl who would fold under pressure. Instead, she'd tracked him to his hideout, walked into his camp alone, and taken down his entire gang in less than 10 seconds. The hunt was over, but the real work was just beginning. She still had to get Morrison and his surviving men back to Cedar Gulch alive, collect her bounty, and make sure word of tonight's events spread throughout the territory. Because Catherine Sullivan had a reputation to maintain, and that reputation depended on making sure every outlaw in the West understood one simple fact. When the Huntress set her sights on you, you were already caught. You just didn't know it yet. Chapter 4. Justice Delivered. Dawn was breaking over Cedar Gulch as Kate Sullivan rode down Main Street with her prisoners in tow. She'd fashioned a makeshift travois for Jake Wilson, whose shoulder wound had bled considerably but wasn't life-threatening. Tommy Martinez rode his own horse with his hands bound, looking like a man who'd aged a decade overnight. And leading the small procession, his hands cuffed and his famous arrogance replaced by sullen resignation, was Black Jack Morrison himself. The town was just beginning to stir as the odd parade made its way toward the sheriff's office. Early risers stepped out of shops and houses to witness the impossible sight. The notorious outlaw who'd terrorized the territory for months, brought in by the same slip of a girl he'd mocked the day before. Sheriff Tom Bradley emerged from his office as Kate dismounted in front of the building, his expression shifting from sleepy confusion to wide-eyed amazement as he recognized her prisoners. "Kate Sullivan," Bradley said, shaking his head in disbelief. "When you rode out yesterday evening, I figured we'd be finding your body in the hills come spring. How in hell did you manage this?" "Carefully," Kate replied, helping Morrison down from his horse with businesslike efficiency. "Sheriff, I'm delivering one Black Jack Morrison, wanted dead or alive, for $800, one Jake Wilson, wanted for cattle rustling in New Mexico territory for $150, and one Tommy Martinez, who I'm willing to testify was trying to surrender when the shooting started." Bradley examined the prisoners with the wonder of a man seeing a miracle. "Morrison, you black-hearted son of a gun. I never thought I'd see the day when someone brought you in alive. What happened to your gang?" Morrison said nothing, but Tommy Martinez, apparently eager to distance himself from his former associates, spoke up quickly. "She walked right into our camp, Sheriff, middle of the night, bold as brass. Boss and the others thought they could take her, but—" He shuddered at the memory. "Never seen anything like it. She moved faster than thought itself." "Where's Pete Kowalski?" Bradley asked, noting the missing member of Morrison's gang. "Boot Hill," Kate said simply. He chose to reach for his gun instead of the sky. As Bradley and his deputy began processing the prisoners, a crowd had gathered in the street outside the sheriff's office. Word was spreading quickly through Cedar Gulch that the infamous Black Jack Morrison had been captured by the female bounty hunter who'd been laughed at less than 24 hours earlier. Among the spectators, Kate noticed several of the men who'd been in the Dusty Trail saloon when Morrison had made his mocking speech. Their expressions ranged from amazement to embarrassment as they remembered their laughter at her expense. "Miss Sullivan," came a voice from the crowd. It was Reverend Matthews, Cedar Gulch's preacher and one of the few men in town who'd treated Kate with respect from the beginning. The whole town owes you a debt of gratitude. Morrison's gang has been terrorizing honest folks for months. Just doing my job, Reverend, Kate replied, checking the bonds on her prisoners one final time before turning them over to Bradley's custody. Your job? The voice belonged to James Crawford, the bank president who'd been particularly vocal in his skepticism about female bounty hunters. Miss Sullivan, what you did was... well, it was nothing short of miraculous. How did you track them so quickly? Kate studied Crawford's face, noting the mixture of genuine admiration and masculine embarrassment at having been proven wrong so dramatically. Mr. Crawford, tracking is like reading a book. The land tells you everything you need to know if you pay attention to what it's saying, but taking them alive, outnumbered 4-1. Crawford shook his head. Most men wouldn't have attempted such a thing. Most men would have tried to prove how tough they were, Kate observed. Sometimes being underestimated is the best advantage you can have. Morrison, who'd been silent since his capture, finally spoke up from where he sat in shackles. You want to know how she did it? She made us think we were safe, then she made us think we were surrounded. Then she moved faster than any gunfighter I've ever seen. That woman ain't human. She's some kind of avenging angel. I'm just a woman who knows her business, Kate corrected. And Mr. Morrison, you might want to remember that the next time you're tempted to mock someone because of their size or gender. Sheriff Bradley emerged from his office with a leather pouch that clinked pleasantly as he handed it to Kate. 800 for Morrison, 150 for Wilson. I sent a telegram to the territorial governor about young Martinez. Given his cooperation and apparent willingness to reform, there might be consideration for leniency. Kate pocketed the bounty money, her mind already moving to the next case. The money was important. It represented financial independence in a world where women had few options for supporting themselves. But the real value of today's work lay in what it would do for her reputation. Sheriff, she said, I'd appreciate it if you made sure the full story gets into the territorial newspapers. Every detail, including Morrison's, its comments about women bounty hunters. Bradley grinned. Oh, you can count on that, Miss Sullivan. This story's going to be told from here to California. The outlaw who mocked the Huntress and found himself delivered to the sheriff's door 24 hours later. As Kate prepared to leave Cedar Gulch, she reflected on the events of the past day. Morrison's mockery in the saloon had been meant to humiliate her and establish his dominance through intimidation. Instead, it had provided her with the perfect motivation to prove once and for all that Catherine Sullivan was exactly as dangerous as her reputation claimed. The story would spread throughout the territory and beyond, carried by telegraph wires and traveling storytellers. Every outlaw in the West would know that the woman who walked alone and rode without backup was not to be underestimated or mocked. More importantly, every woman who dreamed of independence would know that it was possible to make a place for herself in a man's world through skill, courage, and absolute refusal to accept limitations imposed by others. As Kate mounted Dancer and prepared to ride toward her next case, she heard Morrison's voice calling from the jail window. Kate Sullivan, this ain't over. When I get out of prison, I'm coming for you. Kate turned in her saddle and looked back at the man who'd called her a slip of a girl who would fold faster than a bad poker hand. Mr. Morrison, she called back. When you get out of prison, if you get out of prison, you'll be an old man, and I'll still be the Huntress. Think carefully about whether you really want to test those odds again. With that, she rode out of Cedar Gulch, leaving behind a legend that would grow with each telling. The Huntress, who'd walked into an outlaw camp alone and emerged with 3 prisoners. The woman who'd turned mockery into justice and proved that in the American West, it wasn't the size of the hunter that mattered. It was the size of the heart and the speed of the draw. Catherine Sullivan had delivered more than just prisoners to the sheriff's door. She delivered a message that would echo across the frontier for generations to come. Underestimate the Huntress at your own peril. Epilogue. The legend grows. 6 months later, in saloons from Texas to Montana, men would tell the story of Black Jack Morrison and the Huntress who brought him to justice. The tale grew with each telling, as frontier stories always did, but the core remained true. A woman mocked and underestimated had proven herself the equal of any man in the dangerous business of bounty hunting. Kate Sullivan's reputation had become legendary, and her success had opened doors for other women who chose to make their living by the gun. But she never forgot the lesson of that August day in Cedar Gulch, that sometimes the greatest victories came not from proving how tough you were, but from letting others underestimate you until it was too late for them to recover from their mistake. Morrison served 12 years in territorial prison and was eventually released, a broken, elderly man. He never again mentioned the name Catherine Sullivan, and he never again mocked anyone foolish enough to challenge him. Some lessons once learned were never forgotten, and in the annals of Western justice, the story of the outlaw who mocked the Huntress became a cautionary tale about the dangers of judging others by their appearance rather than their actions. Because in the end, it wasn't the size of the person that mattered. It was the size of their courage and the accuracy of their aim.